That was the problem.
So this is considered, they're just here to look. They can't, they're not gonna, unless they talk about it.
Okay, good evening, citizens and guests and council and staff.
Howdy.
City Clerk, are we ready? Let's do it.
Yes, sir. Mayor Cernanik?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Beckman?
Here.
Councilmember Brinkman?
Here.
Councilmember Cole?
Here.
Councilmember Stahlman?
Here.
Councilmember Stein?
Here.
Councilmember Valdez?
Present.
Okay, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Council, with regard to this evening's agenda, we are moving up item 8A to follow the consent agenda. Are there any other changes to consider?
So I have a request to pull the item 6, the resolution 6 on Geneva Village, and move it to a study session because the issues are so complex.
Second that if that's a motion.
Okay. Motion is made and seconded. Discussion. Councilmember Cole.
Well, I've been studying this a good bit of the past few days, and I think there are issues, larger issues to look at that are, they're not buried, but they're not really addressed in this. I think we need to be looking at if there's something we're wanting with that property 10, 15 years from now, how we might get there. There's a whole series of things that I think are not addressed.
Additional questions or discussion? Councilmember Stein?
Well, I respectfully disagree. I don't think it's all that complicated. It's simply an economic decision that the council is supposed to make, and correct me if I'm wrong, city manager, but the plans for Geneva Village 15 years from now, we're not being asked to discuss, address, or make any decision on if that's what if I'm correctly understanding what you're raising.
Councilmember Beckman?
Yeah, I think it's a very important issue, and I think it's not economic only. It has to do deals with people and deals with some of the traditions and established priorities that the city has had in the past based on how we've passed the budget and how we've done various events involving that facility, including the maintenance. I think what we really need to have is a strategic plan to make a decision about how long we're going to be able to maintain those buildings before it's not economically feasible. I think we need to have a strategic plan to talk about how do we then deal with the realities of that building and the maintenance and all those other issues. And we do those things in a fashion that once we have a plan, then we can begin to figure out how we would implement it in a way that it doesn't penalize any of the current city employees. City residents.
Councilmember Valdez.
And this is more complicated than what it looks like. I think just to come in here and say $50 increase with no information, it is more complex than that. And absolutely, I think this requires more discussion. And Mr. Beckman, I absolutely agree with the stuff you just said. Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, the motion is to take consent agenda item 6A and move it to a study session agenda. Council ready to vote?
The vote is 4 in favor, with Councilmember Cernanik, Councilmember Brinkman, and Councilmember Stein voting no. The motion carries.
Okay. Consent agenda item 6A is then on a study session agenda, and we'll look to see for the schedule of that.
I guess I won't be pulling it then.
That's correct. Okay. Any other items on the agenda? Seeing none, looking for a motion on the minutes of the 24th of June's meeting.
I move based upon the city clerk's certification, the 24 June 2014 video recording is approved as the minutes of the 24 June 2014 special meeting.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second on the minutes to be approved. Council ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Okay. Thank you, Council. We have no guest citizens nor scheduled public presentations. We do have time for unscheduled public appearances. Unscheduled public appearances are an opportunity for any citizen to express opinions or ask questions.
Jerry, why don't you stay
hold on,
up,
Jerry,
stay
I'll
up
give you
there and they'll bring the mic to you.
No, that's okay. I don't mind coming down.
Okay. Okay. Express opinions or ask questions regarding city services, council policies, or other matters of community concern that are not part of the scheduled agenda. Generally, an immediate response should not be expected. Typically, issues are referred to city staff for follow-up information or research and reported back to the council and the individual that initiated the comment or inquiry. If any citizen would like to speak during unscheduled public appearances, please complete a green citizen card located on the table at the entrance to the council chambers and provide that card to the city clerk or leave it at the podium. And, of course, there's a time limit of 4 minutes. Mr.
Mayor,
Hill.
Council.
Please state
My
your
name is Jerry Hill. I live at 5444 South Prince. It may not be very important. It's very important to me. It's very important to some of these people that are here. It's not an emotional thing as far as it's the history of it. And some of you have been here for a while and understand the history of why you have this campus here and how you bought it from Geneva Association and the stipulations during that and some of the things that that Larry Berkowitz went through as far as researching it, as far as in '68 when they purchased this property, what it was targeted for, and why it's still in existence. And some people with Littleton Housing have a misconception on how much money the people that live in Geneva Village and who the people are. Some of the people that live in Geneva Village, some of them, there's 3 of them at least, maybe 4, that are over 90 years of age. They've lived a while. They have virtually no retirement to start with and have little left over. They were told when they moved into Geneva Village, not that they could live there forever, but that there would be a stipulation that you could plan on what was going to happen. In 2000, we were told that they were going to move Geneva Village wherever, and the people there would be able to live at Bradley House or live someplace for sure, but they wouldn't have to, they were going to build a police building there. It became almost a civic issue that everybody said, it's a nice park, it's a good place to live, why not just leave the seniors alone? It took from 2000 to 2004 to get that accomplished. Now, during that time, I'm not advocating that we live forever. I'm 78 years old. Some mornings I wake up and say, am I going to make it for another 2 years, another year and a half? I'm going to die. When I die, I would appreciate if you would think about grandfathering in. There's 28 residents there right now. If we, and I just noticed this, I just found out this afternoon at about 2:30 that what was happening. But $50 a month for 28 people, that's $1,400 a month. It's going to affect your budget. $1,400 times 12 is what? 1,688 or something. I say that off the top of my head. That may not be exactly right. Is $16,800 going to totally or going to affect your overall budget, the overall big picture in the long run that you have to come after? That's poor wording. Let me change that. I feel like if I were going to recommend or come up with some kind of a plan, or whether it takes 3 study sessions or three months to come up with something, I would probably, in my infinite knowledge, I would say, let's grandfather the 28 people in. When Jerry Hill dies, let's put the burden on Littleton Housing to say, if we want to to put somebody in that unit or that apartment, let's tell them ahead of time up front what we feel like is fair market value. How much time do I have?
One more sentence, Jerry.
One more second?
Sentence.
Make it a long one.
I'm not sure I can comply. Have you got a different timekeeper there? Excuse me, Mr. Penny, we have an appointment next Monday at 10:30. It's on an entirely different issue, and I didn't even dream about this.
You'll have more than 4 minutes.
But I'll have more than 4 minutes. Okay.
Thank you, Jerry.
But anyhow, I'll try to make it quick. I would probably say let's grandfather them in. If people, there are about 1 to 2 to 3 people every single year have to move out, either go to assisted living, have to go to a nursing home, or just go to the cemetery. So when they do, then put the burden on Littleton Housing. You're paying them $2,500 a month to take care of this, and let them know their new residents exactly what's going to happen, and that you're going to charge fair market price of $900 or $400 or whatever you want to do it, but they know up front what is going to happen. Is that?
And thank
I
you.
didn't have a chance to even read this. Are you talking about a $50 a month increase?
I'm going to say thank you, Jerry. We'll have a study session yet.
Thank you. Okay. And I'm saying that these people stopped in, and every one of them probably couldn't even handle $50 more a month. And if you have any question about them, you can call them up one at a time, and they can tell you what their finances is. And I'm sorry that Littleton Housing wasn't able to give you a good picture or a good recommendation. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry. Other public appearance? Seeing none, we'll move on to...
Hang on, Phil. Make sure he gets on.
Wishful thinking. You're kidding, right?
I didn't see anyone raise their hands.
Very long time.
Yeah.
Good evening, Carol.
Hi. Carol Breezak. I live in the 4th District. First, as a reminder, I've not had a response yet from the council on the 2 questions that I asked a few weeks ago. I will continue to ask until I get a response. That is what you say you will do. I would like to describe to you what a Colorado Open Records request looks like when you submit one to the chair of LIFT. On June 19th, I submitted a CORA request to both our city clerk and the chair of LIFT, to both because I was uncertain which one was the correct person. On June 24th, I received an email from the chair of LIFT saying that the document I was seeking was not available to LIFT electronically. However, a copy of the notebook was located in the city clerk's office and available for inspection during office hours. On June 27th, I was informed that the documents to view on June 27th wasn't a good day. They were all packed up. They were making their move to the new office, which was fine. And I was told sometime after Tuesday would be great. So at the council meeting, Tuesday, July 1st, I asked the clerk if it was all right for me to come in on Wednesday, as she had stated that was the preferred day, to review the documents, and told that it really wasn't. I got the feeling she was uncomfortable with me coming in to see them, and she told me that the LIFT chair would be picking up the documents and I should get in touch with him. So I emailed the chair and asked when and where I could come and see the documents. He told me the documents would be in the city clerk's office until Thursday mid-afternoon, and I should check with the clerk if I wanted to see them before Thursday afternoon. I called the clerk to see if I could come in. After hesitation, she said no. The city manager said no. So I wrote back to the chair, let him know that he would have to, and he let me know that I would have to meet him in a coffee shop between 9 and noon on the 4th of July or the 5th. I accepted his offer to meet on the 5th. Then later, on July 3rd, I received another email from the chair of LIFT saying that he had just returned from City Hall, where he had met the city manager, and the city has now agreed to house the LIFT documents in the city clerk's office. The notebook was in Wendy's office and therefore available for review during normal office hours, and he preferred that I arrange to go to her office. On July 7th, almost 2 weeks after the law requires, the documents were made available to me. I bring this up for a couple of reasons. What LIFT does is important to the citizens of Littleton. It is important that citizens are well informed, and that can only happen if their meetings are open and if there's an honest effort by LIFT to ensure that the public has all access to all the documents. That includes having documents printed and available for audience members at each of their meetings. It is also important that the Colorado Open Records Act is followed and that citizens have access to any and all records, minutes, resolutions, and working documents. Citizens should not have to jump through hoops to get a CORA request fulfilled. Citizens have been criticized by the LIFT chair for not having accurate information, yet he is making information difficult to get. The contract between Ricker Cunningham and LIFT states that the documents will be transmitted to the LIFT executive director in electronic form, a PDF. I don't believe the documents that I requested were not available to LIFT electronically, as I was told. There appears to be a deliberate effort to keep the information from the public. You have some authority over LIFT, and I'm asking you to exercise that authority. Ask them to follow your example by providing copies of all documents that are part of their meeting for the public. If a CORA request is made, to respond appropriately and to provide electronic copies when they are available, and it would be a rare instance when an electronic copy is not available. The whole urban renewal process will go much better if the public is provided with information along the way. Being treated otherwise only raises concerns and creates an atmosphere that's unpleasant for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Other public appearance? Pam, come on down.
My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live at the corner of Crestline in Nevada in District 1. And I'd just like to add to Carol's testimony that Carol didn't submit the CORA request first. She made the request at the LIFT meeting. And if I recall correctly, the chair told her that this was harassment. That's not what I expect from people who are officials who represent Littleton. So I endorse what Carol said. I heard more than what she explained. It's not the way that Littleton should treat its citizens. And there's no question it raises questions and doubts about the openness of this city and its relationship with citizens with respect to urban renewal. I will remind you that twice you've been told by your hired professionals that it's important to get the neighborhood plans done and involve the public in the urban renewal process, and that's not starting when you start. That's during LIFT as well. So please engage LIFT and encourage them to act like Littleton citizens should, the way I expect them to, because they are Littleton citizens, except for one who's moved out of Littleton, by the way. And ask them to treat us with respect and openness. That's the way business should be conducted in Littleton. And I'll just remind you, I grew up here. Mrs. Crandall and Dan Brickley taught me civics at Littleton High School. I read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I'm not radical. I'm just an American. So, secondly, I'm appalled by the 6A agenda item. I'm very glad that 4 of you decided to move it to a study session. That's also no way to treat not only the residents of Geneva Village, but again, the citizens of Littleton. Let me remind you again, as I've spoken about this before, there's a higher level view here. Where in the citywide plan does it talk about affordable housing? This is an issue that we look to you as representatives of the residents and businesses of Littleton to address. At least address it. At least put it up for discussion. At least include it in the process. And then document the results in our documents like the economic plan and the citywide plan. And then Geneva Village would be part of that solution. And I look to you to solve that. Demographics about an aging population and whether they need buses is only a part of the issues that the city faces. And it's your job and the staff's job to look at the whole array of issues and consider solutions to them. So again, as a citizen, I look at you as representatives of us and ask you to represent us well and help us solve the issues that are coming up for Littleton in the next decades. So thanks for your consideration on these two issues.
Thank you, Pam. Public, Jeannie.
Good evening. My name is Jeannie Erickson. I live in District 1. I'm here to speak about a couple of things this evening. I've been watching your study sessions regarding the signage for downtown Littleton. We have a downtown that is 4 blocks long. Although the lady is doing a lovely job on her presentation, and her ideas are great too, but I don't believe it's a project that should be done in downtown Littleton, which is 4 blocks long. I believe it's a waste of taxpayers' money to have 4 to 6 foot titanium signs directing you down side streets when downtown is only 4 blocks. People should be able to find everything in the matter of a few minutes by walking a couple of blocks. There is nothing wrong with our garbage cans, nor our benches. My solution for some kind of image to show that you are now entering downtown Littleton would be a huge American flag on a huge flagpole with a sign saying Historic Downtown Littleton with an arrow pointing in the correct direction. We don't need to be trendy. We don't need to be fancy. We need to be who we are, charming, historic, little downtown. The other thing I wanted to address tonight was, in 4 minutes I don't have enough time to talk about all of the blighted areas, but I'm going to bring up 2 of them. The first one is at the corner of Lowell and Bellevue, and that has been blighted by the city. It houses 14 businesses that are all occupied with tenants. Here's an example of some of the tenants that are in there. My mechanic's there, who fixes my car for me. There's a pizzeria, a liquor store, dry cleaners, barber shop, gas stations, dance studio, just to name a few. And why would this area be considered blighted when all of these businesses are occupied? Are there weeds or overhead electrical poles or cracks in the sidewalk? Would that make this area blighted? Because those are some of the reasons for blight. I would also like to express my concerns about the blighting of the strip mall located at 5501 South Broadway. I believe it used to be a Safeway years ago. The Colorado Antique Gallery is located there and has been there for, as far as I've been told, 19 years. The Antique Gallery has 275 booths that tenants rent and stock. Many booths are run by 2 people, which means as many as 400 plus people are currently working at that building. It must be one of the top employers in the city, and it's been blighted. I would hate to see what would happen if the city decided that they have a better idea for what should be in that area and take it over by eminent domain, which urban renewal allows. As many as 400 people would be out of work. I am not against progress. I am not against change. It is definitely part of life. I am for rational development that can happen as the economy allows. The urban renewal that the city wants to revitalize has the means to take people's property by eminent domain. I am against eminent domain, and that is why I am against urban renewal for Littleton. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Doug?
Doug Clark, Houston Waring. South Metro Housing Options manages 3 properties in the Littleton Boulevard study area, which has been studied for blight by your urban renewal consultant, Ann Ricker. All 3 of the properties have been determined by the consultant to have a minimum of 6 conditions of blight, which rise to the level of being a menace to the public health, safety, morals, or welfare. 3 of the conditions that are common to the properties are that they have been determined by the consultant to be unsafe for living, unsanitary, and a fire danger. The big problem here is that 2 of those properties are currently being used as housing for the elderly and the disabled, the Bradley House and Allison Court. Both of those properties are owned by the City of Littleton. The solution proposed both by the mayor and by your consultant is to remove the properties from the urban renewal area. However, removing the properties from the area does not fix the blight which your consultant found on the properties. In fact, it's the opposite. It prevents you from using urban renewal to fix the blight, which is precisely the reason for doing urban renewal in the first place. I will also add that leaving the elderly and the disabled to live in unsafe, unsanitary, and dangerous housing because you want to spend TIF money on increasing tax revenue rather than fixing blight that affects the elderly and the disabled is just plain wrong. To complicate matters, the Bradley House is public housing and Allison Court was built with Section 8 money, both of which came in part from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD requires a local housing authority, which is the South Metro Housing Options, to inspect the housing each year to ensure that it is decent, safe, and sanitary. So South Metro Housing Options has been telling HUD that the Bradley House and Allison Court are decent, safe, and sanitary, while your consultant has released a report telling you that those same properties are unsafe, unsanitary, and a fire danger. Both cannot be right. The report was released 2 months ago. You've had multiple speakers come before you in the past weeks to talk about the properties in the reports. These are your properties and your housing authority. At this point, I suspect that you're obligated to notify HUD that you have knowledge that your properties do not meet HUD's housing quality standards. I recommend that you make a concerted effort to determine who is right, your consultant or your housing authority. If your housing authority is right, then your urban renewal consultant and all the blight studies she's produced for Littleton are called into question. On the other hand, if your consultant is right, you have some serious problems with the housing authority and the fire marshal and your code enforcement department. Plus, someone will probably need to be refunding money to HUD, and you'll need to deal with the falsification of inspection reports to HUD. Unless, of course, you want to claim that the properties are unsafe, unsanitary, and a fire danger when you're siphoning up Littleton Public School District money, and at the same time claim that they're decent, safe, and sanitary when you're scooping up HUD money. I think, however, that trying to claim both at the same time, most independent observers would consider that to be fraud. But unfortunately, that's the exact position that you find yourself at, because you have 2 different entities making opposing claims on that. Thank you.
Any additional public appearances? And I'll just remind Doug that I believe those reports went to the LIFT board, not to the council, so at this point in time. So moving to consent agenda, we have consent agenda items can be adopted by a simple motion. All ordinances must be read by title prior to a vote on the motion. Any consent agenda item may be removed at the request of a council member. First, we have consent agenda item 6B, Resolution 53-2014. It's a resolution authorizing a cooperative agreement with Littleton Housing Authority doing business as South Metro Housing Options.
I'd like to pull that.
Next is consent agenda item 6C. It's ID number 14-181. It's a motion to appoint Patrick Dunahay to the Board of Directors of the Highline Business Improvement District. Consent agenda item 6D is a resolution 59-2014. It's a resolution authorizing a cooperation agreement with Littleton Riverfront Authority doing business as Littleton Invest for Tomorrow. And consent agenda item 6E is ordinance 26-2014, an ordinance on first reading authorizing the purchase of a portion of the Metro Mayflower site for completion of construction of the Littleton Community Trail. Looking for a motion to approve consent agenda items 6C, D, and E.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion and second on consent agenda items 6C, D, and E. Council ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Okay. Moving back to consent agenda item 6B, Councilmember Valdez.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. I want more clarification, if anything. Probably for this is our finance director. One thing I do want to point out, though, all the properties that South Metro Housing operates, they are inspected, or at least if they're HUD related, they are inspected by HUD on a regular schedule. And so if they're in bad shape, HUD would certainly be the first ones to tell us that. But on this, what we're looking at here, though, it talks about the impact will be an additional $13,500, but then later in the resolution itself, it says it's reimbursed. Is that correct?
These are reimbursable costs that we would be billing South Metro Housing Authority.
Okay, so while it'll be 13 or an estimated 13,500, whatever the actual expense is, that's what will be reimbursed?
Yes, some of them are spelled out as actual amounts, and a couple of the items will be based on the activity, how many employees our human resources helps them with for pre-employment. So that's $87 a screening. So some of those costs, the $13,500 is an estimate, yes.
Cool. But reimbursed whatever it is.
Reimbursed revenues.
Thanks,
right.
Appreciate it.
Motion.
I make the motion to approve resolution number 35-2014, authorizing the cooperative agreement with Littleton Housing Authority doing business as South Metro Housing Options.
Would be 53-.
53-2014.
With the restatement, we have a motion and a second. Council, any discussion? Seeing none, council ready to vote? Again, this is a motion to approve resolution authorizing a cooperative agreement with Littleton Housing Authority doing business as South Metro Housing Authority.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Did I say 52? Yeah. 35.
Thank you, Council. And now with our adjusted agenda, we're going to move down to item A, general business, ID 14-100, which is the 2013 audit report and comprehensive annual financial report presentation. And everyone is at the edge of their seats.
Good boy.
Director Farman.
Council, thank you. We did complete the city's annual audit this year, which was completed in May. This is for the 2013 audit, and we generate a comprehensive annual financial report that is independently audited every year. And this year was the first annual audit that was completed by Anton Collins and Mitchell, LLC. And we have the pleasure of having a couple of their firm members here this evening to present the audit report, and that is Randy Watkins and Tyra Litzow.
Good evening. I'm Randy Watkins. I'm a partner with Anton Collins Mitchell. We were engaged to perform the audit of the financial statements for the City of Littleton. In a moment, I'll introduce Tyra. I'll ask her to come up and go through the audit wrap document. But before I get into that, I did want to thank Doug and Tiffany and their whole team for their efforts in preparing for the audit. As you can imagine, it is no small task to prepare for what we come in and do. There's a long list of items that we request up front. They prepare that information. From that, we make another bunch of selections, and they prepare that as well. And then we sit here in the field and ask a bunch of questions, all while they're trying to do their daily jobs. So just wanted to thank them for that and commend them for their efforts. It's because of that we were able to get this done on time. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn the mic back over to Tyra, and she'll walk you through the audit wrap document, which is the one with the two people walking away from the building like they just finished the audit. So
thank you, Randy.
Thank you. This is our required communications to those charged with governance, and in this case, the City of Littleton City Council is those charged with governance. So auditing standards require that we provide certain representations and communications to those charged with governance. The status of our audit, we have completed our audit of the financial statements, like Randy indicated. The objective of our audit is to obtain reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. And what that means is that we do risk-based approach, we do sampling, and we don't audit every single transaction that the city of Littleton enters into every year. The scope of the work that we performed was substantially the same as what we communicated to you in January. We did issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, and what that means is it's a clean opinion. All records and informations were freely made available, and like Randy mentioned, management's cooperation was excellent for the audit. We were provided full access of information. The results of our audit, we do look at significant accounting practices and policies that are implemented by the city. Page 4 of the audit wrap document just talks about our primary areas of focus. Like I mentioned, we do a risk-based approach. We look at significant areas, volumes of transactions. Some of the primary areas of focus is just revenue recognition, making sure that all the revenues that the city receives in the various forms is properly recorded in the proper period. We also look at the accounts receivable and any allowances on those accounts receivable. The city did determine that approximately $791,000 of the receivables were deemed to be uncollectible, and that's just relating to the emergency medical transportation services. We do look at capital assets and depreciation just due to the large volume of assets and then the significant areas in terms of new asset additions. We also look at the debt of the city. There are some capital lease obligations, about $9.1 million. There's also a revenue loan payable. We look at those to make sure that everything's being reported properly and that there's anything relating to the debt in terms of debt obligations or covenants. We also look at evaluations of going concern. That usually is not an issue, but sometimes it can be, as we've seen recently, but at the city that wasn't an issue. And we also determined that all estimates were reasonable and free of bias. There was a corrected misstatement in terms of the audit. That's at the back of that document, and that was a prior period adjustment for some depreciation expense on one of the assets. And we also identified an uncorrected misstatement, and it also had to do with depreciation. Page 6 just is the internal control over financial reporting. As part of our audit, we do look at internal controls as part of our planning process to gain a better understanding of the audit areas and as part of our planning processes. We are required to communicate to those charged with governance if there are any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies identified, and we did not identify any material weaknesses in the internal controls for the city of Littleton. There are some other required communications that are on the page 7 that I won't go into a lot of detail, and then on page 8 also just reaffirms that we are independent for the audit purposes, both in fact and appearance, from the city of Littleton. I won't spend a lot of time on the CAFR itself, but the city does issue a comprehensive annual financial report for the city's financial information. Like I mentioned, we did issue an unqualified opinion, which is a clean opinion. There weren't any significant changes in the estimates or any of the policies or practices of the city for the year. The only thing that I would mention is there was that prior period adjustment that was identified relating to depreciation expense that changed the net position for the governmental activities. But other than that, I won't go into a lot of detail in the CAFR. Is there anything you want me to talk about?
Okay. I think unless you have questions for us as we go along, I think there's time at the end for some questions. Now that she's walked you through the audit wrap document and the CAFR briefly, I'll take you through the beyond the numbers. I think that was supplied in advance as well. It's a report that we created. I think we may have gone over it during the proposal process, but it's a report that we created that takes the financial data that's in the CAFR and presents it in graphs in a way that I think kind of tells the story a little bit better than just looking at the raw data. What we tried to focus on with this report is trends, so comparing year over year for a period of 3 to 5 years usually, and then also benchmarking, where we try to compare you to similar peers. I will say that it is difficult to find apples to apples comparisons. The amount of services provided, both government and public safety and those types of things, vary fairly significantly between communities. So it is difficult to find a direct correlation, but we try to do some benchmarking based on information provided by management. So skipping past the cover letter and the table of contents, there's an organization page that describes the content of this report. We based the peer data or the benchmarking data on information obtained from 5 municipalities. The demographics of those municipalities, they were between 25,000 and 150,000 in population. They were mostly between 25 and I think 75. There was one outlier at about 150,000. The communities that were selected were in the cover letter, and we did obtain that information from management. They were asked us to take a look at those. The average size of the communities was 75,000, the smallest was 30,000, and the largest was 145. There were just a couple ratios I was going to focus on. I would encourage you to go through all of them. What we did is explain what the ratio tells you, is that kind of the first section of each of the tables, and then also worked with management to add some color around the reasons for any variances, either year over year or on a benchmarking basis. The first one that I'll take you to is the capital asset ratio, which is on page 8. This just shows you that the accumulated depreciation as a percentage of the total capital assets is quite a bit higher at the City of Littleton than it is in most of the peer groups. And there's a table in the back that we'll go through real quickly that it's an indication that the age of the infrastructure might be a little bit further along in the City of Littleton. So that's just one thing we wanted to point out. Liquidity, which is on the next page, page 9. Here you've got, so what this is measuring is it's comparing liquid assets, which is basically cash and short-term investments, and comparing that to your current obligations. And you can see that the city's in a great position as far as this goes. You've got 6 times your current liabilities sitting in liquid assets, which is better than the peer group, and it has improved year over year. 2011 was a little higher, but still fairly consistent. The next one is the debt per capita. This kind of goes hand in hand with the aging of the infrastructure, but the debt per capita at the city's nearly half of what it is in the peer group, which is a good thing, and kind of goes hand in hand too with the interest and debt service per capita as well, per citizen. Towards the end, there's a table. Let me see if I can find the right page. 23 and 24. So this just takes your individual capital asset categories that you can find within the financial statements and then shows you the average age of the assets. And all we're doing is basically dividing the net book value by the depreciation expense to determine how many years are left on the assets on average. And you can see when you compare that remaining life to the depreciable lives that a lot of the categories are kind of further along. Do you have any questions on anything that was presented either in the audit wrap document, the CAFR, or this Beyond the Numbers report?
Council? Yes.
Thank you for the report. I just want to comment that I was on the committee that selected you all, along with at that time Council Member Taylor, and one of the items that you promised to provide was Beyond the Numbers. I'm so glad to see that. I think there's a lot of meat in there still for us to look at, so thank you for that.
Yep, absolutely.
And I do have one question. And we've talked about the uncollectible receivable involving the emergency medical transport. It's been discussed at budget sessions, and it's also, I think, been discussed in terms of future plans for the fire department and how exactly they're organized. But the number is not a small number.
Right.
And I'm wondering if, as you looked at that, based on other agencies that you may be familiar with, similar to as you did with Beyond the Numbers, how are others dealing with this challenge? And I know it's a nationwide challenge. If you have any familiarity.
Okay.
From my understanding with the that uncollectible amount, it's just everything that's over 6 months outstanding is shown as that uncollectible. And that can change based on billing. In terms of how it's being handled other places, I believe that other entities that also have emergency medical transportation services have the same issue relating to the billing and being collectible.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't have anything more to add to that. I apologize.
I don't think there's really an answer out there yet, but
Right.
I thought maybe with your experience you might have seen something.
Councilmember Stallman.
Well, a question, and I don't necessarily want to drag the chief down in your compromised condition, but we've talked with the fire partners about a variety of creative process changes, putting paramedics in SUVs and having them run around to try to address issues proactively as opposed to reactively. And I guess if you can nod in assent or otherwise, is there some sense that if we start implementing some of these things, we might see that uncollectible number go down a little bit because we might see the EMT piece in general be managed better?
Okay. Can you take the mic to him?
You just look that hurt.
I would say it really wouldn't have an impact.
Okay.
Only because it's not really going to have an impact on our transport rates. And the collection and the billing is tied specifically to our EMS transports.
Okay.
So those vehicles that you're talking about would not transport or reduce the number of transports. It would keep our units available for more transports, but that would have no impact on our billing or collections.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
I just confirm that with Doug too. It's based on the reimbursement rates that are available for those types of transports. But I can reach out. One thing we've been fairly successful with in questions that we weren't able to answer immediately, I can reach out to some of our counterparts over at BDO. They do governmental audits throughout the country, and just kind of see what other options might be available. But it doesn't sound like there would be any. So.
And Randy, you mentioned one of the ways to dig beyond the numbers is to go back to staff and possibly ask questions with regard to those. What I'll do is I'll ask council to maybe submit those questions to Director Farman. He can collect those and see whether there's anything there, and with the city manager kind of figure out how to respond to those rather than looking for individual responses. So if over the next week folks can kind of dig into that and get those to Director Farman. Okay, Council?
Can I ask just one question, because the mention of the debt is here, whatever. The kinds of things that we have debt on, are we including the wastewater treatment debt, or?
I think this report is primarily focusing on governmental, not the business type activities.
Okay.
Which that would have been in that debt number.
Okay.
So I think the business type activities debt, future maturities is listed in there at the very end, but it's just showing you all of the future maturities for the business type activities. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions from council? No. Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Randy and Tyra.
Thank you.
And appreciate that, Director Farman.
Phil?
Yes.
Just, and again, Doug, just kudos, again, as usual, on the quality of your guys' performance and the relationship. Very professional. We've just come to expect it being on autopilot. It wasn't always that way, so it's greatly appreciated.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate council's support. And again, I just want to thank my great finance staff, and especially Assistant Director Tiffany Hooten. She runs a tight ship as far as the audit. She keeps us on schedule. And as Randy and Tyra noted, if we have everything prepared and organized ahead of time, it really goes a long way, and she helps us to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Important information. Okay, council, we'll move back to ordinances for second reading and public hearing. First up is Ordinance 16-2014, which is an ordinance on second reading, amending the City Code, Section 7-4-9, pertaining to the removal of derelict vehicles from public property and rights of way. Rebecca? And you can give us your title, otherwise I'll get it wrong.
Good evening, Council. I'm Rebecca Thompson, Senior Code Specialist. And the ordinance before you tonight is on second reading, and it's actually to bridge a gap that we have in the current derelict vehicle ordinance. So currently we can post and tow derelict vehicles that are on private property, but not public property or rights of way. So this new ordinance allows us to do that, and it's a valuable tool to help us regulate derelict vehicles throughout the city. And I might add that this ordinance is in line with City Council goal number 2, The fourth objective, which is to provide code enforcement to maintain the safety and quality of the neighborhoods. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Council. No questions. Councilmember Beckman.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you. And my question would be, was this staffed past the police department that they're going to be able to enforce it on the public right-of-way? If there are any issues that affect the public right-of-way?
No, I actually contacted one of the patrol commanders regarding this before we went forward with it, and they do not have any procedures where they post and tow derelict vehicles. They focus on abandoned vehicles.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Additional questions, Council? Okay, I open the public hearing for ordinance 16-2014. There is no one signed up on the roster. Therefore, I will close the public hearing. With that, any additional discussion, Council? Seeing none, looking for
I move to approve on second reading an ordinance amending section 7-4-9 of the Littleton City Code to allow the removal of derelict vehicles from public property and rights of way.
Second.
Okay. Motion and second. Additional discussion. Seeing none, Council ready to vote? Yep.
The vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Okay, next up is ordinance 19-2014, which is an ordinance authorizing an intergovernmental agreement between the city and the Colorado Department of Transportation for reimbursement of costs associated with the operation and maintenance of traffic control devices on state highways within the city limits. Director Boston.
Good evening, Council. We have before you tonight an ordinance on second reading that would authorize an intergovernmental agreement between the city and Colorado Department of Transportation, which would allow us to continue maintaining all of the traffic control devices that exist on State Highway 88, 85, and 75 within the city limits. That's a total of 13 locations, intersections. It includes traffic signals, signage, and striping. The cost of this to CDOT is roughly $45,000 a year. That cost went down from previous 5-year term that we just finished. That is because State Highway 75 through most of Littleton was removed from the CDOT system. So they took those signals away from this reimbursement. Other than that, it's pretty much the same agreement we've been using in the previous 5-year period. Again, for an ordinance, this does elapse for a period of 5 years. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to respond.
Council. Okay. Seeing no questions, I will open the public hearing for ordinance 19-2014. There is no one on the roster. Seeing no one stepping forward, I will close the public hearing and look for a motion.
I have a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance authorizing an intergovernmental agreement with the Colorado Department of Transportation for reimbursement of costs associated with the operation and maintenance of traffic control devices on state highways within the city limits.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Any questions or discussion, Council? Nope. Seeing none, Council ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Okay, next up is ordinance 22-2014, which is an ordinance on second reading, authorizing the approval of an amendment to the intergovernmental agreement with the City of Littleton, Highlands Ranch Metropolitan District, and the Littleton Fire Protection District. Sorry, Chief.
Good evening, Council. This amendment to our contract just has some very minor changes to it. There were some typographical errors in the original agreement that measured our ALS response times at 95%, which should have been 90% by industry standards. And the other change that was made was our minimum staffing going from 36 to 35 personnel. Through our data and analysis and evaluation of our safety and training officer, we had found some severe gaps in our return on our investment for having them on a 24-hour shift. So we made some adjustments and moved them to a 40-hour work week. And the net savings is about $60,000 in overtime and upgrade costs. all the partners have agreed to the amendment, and we're just asking for your support on it.
Okay. Council, any questions?
Actually, sort of just a point of order. Don't we need to have one door open, don't we? I thought we needed to have a door open as far as.
In our rules.
Ask the fire chief.
No, as part of a council.
It's in our rules.
They're not locked.
Leave it open?
To have one door open.
I'm just asking because I thought that there was something where we had to have a door open as far as
Open that one.
an open public meeting is concerned.
Okay, being taken care of. Thank you for the point of order.
Sorry.
Any other discussion items, council? Okay, seeing none, I open the public hearing for ordinance 22-2014. There is no one on the roster. Seeing no one come forward, I will close the public hearing, looking for a motion.
Motion that the ordinance approving an amendment to the intergovernmental agreement with the Highlands Ranch Metro District and Littleton Fire Protection District be approved on second reading.
Second.
Okay, motion and second on the floor. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, council ready to vote?
The vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Thank you, council.
Chief, feel better.
Next up is ordinance 18-2014, which is an ordinance on second reading amending Littleton City Code Title II, Chapter 9, related to the powers and duties of the planning board.
Colin's not here.
Jan?
Good evening, council. The purpose of this ordinance is to correct conflicting information in the code. That resulted in 2012 when City Council considered two ordinances which related to the processing and approval of plan development overlays. The first ordinance that was adopted by Council on April 17, 2012, amended Title II, Chapter 9, which clarifies the powers and duties of the Planning Board. This ordinance changed the board's role from approving comprehensive plans and plan development overlays to providing City Council with recommendations for approval or denial. The second ordinance that Council considered that year was adopted on July 3rd, 2012. This ordinance amended Title 10, which is the zoning regulations, and this was in regard to the Transit Impact Overlay Zone, and it modified the approval process for plan development overlays. The first draft of that particular ordinance proposed the Planning Board as an advisory body in the role of reviewing plan development overlays with council as the final decision. This was consistent with the language that was recently adopted amending the Title II section. However, during the discussion at that hearing, City Council decided that they would rather have Planning Board stay as the approval body of a plan development overlay, and therefore amended the ordinance prior to its adoption to leave Planning Board as an approval body. This resulted in a conflict with the previously approved ordinance relating to Title II, Chapter 9. This, of course, then was discovered later by staff. So we prepared an ordinance tonight that's before you to correct these conflicting requirements and therefore recommend approval.
So, in short, a fix-it.
Fix it, yeah.
Any questions from council? Seeing none, I open the public hearing. There's no one on the roster. Seeing no one coming forward, close the public hearing. Looking for a motion.
Motion to approve on second reading the ordinance amending Littleton City Code Title II, Chapter 9, related to the powers and duties of the Planning Board.
Second.
We have a motion on the second. Any questions or discussion? Council ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Thank you, council. Next up is ordinance 23-2014, which is an ordinance on second reading adding a definition for openly and publicly as it relates to the consumption and growing of marijuana. And Kristen?
May I stay here, or would you like me to approach the dais to address you?
Either way. Okay. You can make it easy because you have the next couple, I think.
So this is to add a definition of openly and publicly, and Amendment 64 did not add a definition for that term, although it does prohibit the open and public consumption and growing of marijuana. You'll recall that our moratorium that we put in place not only was a moratorium on retail marijuana establishments, but also on marijuana clubs. So as part of this definition, I included what was previously the definition for marijuana clubs, which is any place not used for residential purposes where individuals gather to consume or grow marijuana, regardless of whether such place calls itself private or public or charges an admission or membership fee. So this definition pulls in those places that we would know as marijuana clubs and would prohibit that. And then the last part of this ordinance repeals the last remaining component of the moratorium that you put in place.
Thank you, Christian. Any questions from council? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. No one is included on the roster. Seeing no one coming forward, I close the public hearing. Looking for a motion.
I'll do it. Got to find it just a second. I'm sorry. I have a motion, and the motion that the ordinance adding a definition for openly and publicly as it relates to the consumption and growing of marijuana be approved on second reading.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Council ready to vote?
Could we have a quick discussion?
Sure.
I just wanted to tee something up. We haven't talked too much about this before. And chime in. I spoke with the deputy city attorney about this a little bit. You know, there was a little bit of news recently about Denver City Council addressing this exact issue, and my recollection, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was that they were very close to adding some additional definitions such as front porches and balconies and the like, and that was something that they, in their discretion, determined that they were going to table for a later date. Mm-hmm. I would be in favor of that, but I also think that maybe we not, as I think I mentioned in our last meeting, need not be the guinea pig in the marijuana industry and let Denver make some mistakes. But I was just curious about some of your guys' thoughts on that topic.
Councilmember Beckman?
I agree that what you're talking about is probably not something we want to address today because we don't have enough history on the issue. But I have a feeling that we will, because I think that the way in which marijuana is consumed is, unfortunately, it smells, and it draws attention to an area, and it makes areas that people might perceive as being private visible from the public right away, and that's really what their issue was, the backyards, the balconies, and those kinds of things. So I would agree with you that we may be prepared in the future to deal with it, but I don't want to deal with it today.
We're on the same page.
What we have is, at least for medicinal purposes, an effective drug for that, but delivery via smoking is not very good. And that's particularly what gets hit on the balconies and the backyards, whereas consumable or oils don't seem to have those complications. So it's the smoking side of it that, they kick the can down the road, and we'll kick the can with them, I guess, on this one.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we have a motion on the floor regarding Ordinance 23-2014, which is adding a definition for openly and publicly as it relates to the consumption and growing of marijuana. Council ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Thank you, Council. Next is Ordinance 24-2014, an ordinance on second reading amending Title III, Chapter 20, concerning the transfer of medical marijuana center licenses. Kristen?
So this would be a revision to our current medical marijuana code. Currently, licenses are not transferable and not assignable, and we have three of our 4 centers are located in non-conforming locations that do not meet the distance requirements of the marijuana code. In an effort to encourage those centers to move into conforming locations, we are proposing a limited exception to the non-transferable the provision that does not allow them to transfer or assign the license. And in one case, they would be allowed to do that, and that is if they go through the application process in front of the authority and are approved for a new license, subject to relinquishment of one of the licenses by those centers, and then the new location must meet the distance requirements under the code. That they will not be allowed to stay in that location.
So questions by council? Seeing none on this, I open the public hearing. There is no one signed up on the roster. Seeing no one approach, I close the public hearing. Looking for a motion.
Motion that the ordinance amending Title III, Chapter 20 concerning the transfer of medical marijuana center license be approved on second reading.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Council ready to vote or discussion? Councilmember Stein.
Of course. We got to give the taxpayers the money's worth tonight. So I just want to throw this out there to see, again, to tee up a discussion. So I'm a little conflicted by this ordinance. On the one hand, as you know, I'm categorically opposed to encouraging the proliferation of marijuana, and therefore not approving this modification could conceivably lead to the decrease of one or more dispensaries in the city. On the other hand, to me, this is more of a transactional or contractual concept, and I'm of the opinion that it would unfairly restrain a property or business owner's ability to conduct an otherwise legal and perhaps beneficial to those parties transaction. So I think I'm going to support this ordinance, particularly because it does remove a non-conforming use and turn it into a conforming use, but I just wanted to hear what you guys had to say about it.
Other council members? Councilmember Stallman?
I agree. That's my interpretation of it as well.
Yeah. I think it wouldn't necessarily serve the purpose of reducing the number because another applicant, since we have allowed 4 as a total number, what it does do is allow for someone who currently has a license to have some property value associated with having that license. In the end, if there's a new licensee that comes forward, they would not be grandfathered as far as location. So it really has no impact on that conforming location. It just means whether someone has a property right with regard that license is my interpretation of where this is at.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Questions? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. No one on the roster. Close the public hearing.
There's
Oh,
a
yeah, I
motion.
already did that.
Yeah.
We did that already.
Okay. Looking for a motion.
There is a motion already.
We have a motion.
Seconded.
Okay. Motion and second.
Vote.
Looking for vote. Got it. Okay.
The vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Thank you. Randy, you ruined my flow.
I know. I'm sorry.
Okay. Next up is Ordinance 1720-14, or -2014, excuse me, which is an ordinance on second reading amending Title 11, Chapter 7 to revise the capital facility impact fee rates for fire, museum, library, police, and facilities.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll jump in here.
City Manager.
Thank you. This is an update on our impact fee that Council was anticipating. You know, the delay that we had was waiting for the CIRSA annual or semi-annual assessed values on our properties, and so that has been completed. The primary update as part of this ordinance modification to you is the CIRSA evaluation, looking at the debt relocation and the some of the fire units that we had. You'll recall that BBC and Fort Frick had listed 6 items that we should be evaluating as an update to our impact fees. The 2 items that have not been addressed really are around our capital improvement project. You know, we're doing the street evaluation right now, and Mike Broughton, the Deputy City Manager, along with Charles Boston, our Public Works Director, are working on that total capital asset valuation. So when that project is done, probably later this year, early next year, we may return to you yet again with that final update on our impact fees. But for tonight, it's those ones that I mentioned. I want to mention specifically the museum fee because that is a shift that Fort Frick had recommended, and it's in the memo that you have, where in the impact fee from last year that we proposed to you and that you adopted, we were attributing 100% of the capital cost of the museum to residents. And as we had gone through this again and we were working with Ford Frick, again, that's within the memo, we looked at the numbers of residents to non-residents using that museum, and it's roughly a 65-35%. So we reduced that fee by 35% because we can't attribute those capital costs to the non-resident use of something that we're really looking at a regional piece. So the net impact of that was on the residential side, the impact fee has actually gone down because of the shift in the museum. If you look at the other fees, they've actually gone up, but the net total has gone down. That's not the case for the commercial because the commercial doesn't have the museum or the residential, I'm sorry, the museum or the library capital impact fees associated with it. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Questions from council? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. No one has signed up on the roster. No one's approaching. We'll close the public hearing. Looking for a motion.
Motion to approve on second reading the ordinance amending Title 11, Chapter 7 to revise the capital facility impact fee rates for fire, museum, library, police, and facilities.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion by council. Seeing none, ask council to vote. Okay.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Thank you, council. And now to comments and reports. First up, city manager.
Your lights are on still. They may turn off after a few minutes. I'm not sure if there's an auto shut off. No report this evening, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Stein?
No report.
Councilmember Brinkman?
No report.
Councilmember Valdez?
Just a comment. I watched the planning board meeting last night, and the microphones weren't great, but if maybe for Mr. Swain, if we could get a microphone like we used for Councilwoman Cole, because his voice does not exactly project very loudly, and it kind of comes in and out. If you could maybe look into doing that.
Certainly.
Yeah, because he was very difficult. And also, I'm a little bit curious that they're discussing the process for doing the neighborhood plans or reviewing neighborhood plans, whereas it seems they would be better if they discussed the areas or our main corridors or areas where we're expecting possible changes. And I think in one of our emails or something, I think you said something about that as far as Broadway, Bellevue, Broadway, or not Broadway, Bellevue, Federal Bellevue, part of Broadway, those kind of corridors. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't know what the context of their discussion was last night. I did not watch the video, but I'll be happy to talk to the planning director about that. I would concur that their area of focus should be along the major corridors. I believe that there was discussion with the council previously. The neighborhoods from the old plan, we don't anticipate those changing. And so that's not where the energy of focus was going to be. It was going to be around those corridors, which tie in also with the work that LIFT is doing, et cetera. So I would agree with you, and I'll follow up with our planning director.
Great, thank you. That's it.
You're welcome.
Okay. Councilmember Stallman.
Couple items, and I guess one I wanted to ask you. I've got an unrelated item, but I was going to give a bit of a LIFT report, and I can do that after all the reports, or I could
include it with yours.
Do it now? Okay. Unrelated item. ARC Thrift has what we call an ARC University, which is a set of classes, monthly class. I think it's 10 or 11 months. And we've got roughly 50 to 75 folks with developmental disabilities come in, and we do sort of a life skills thing. Well, they're actually going to run the class this month at the museum on the 23rd. So I didn't know if Director Nims was going to be here or not, but they're going to be over there at 11 o'clock on, I think, the 23rd of July, and they're going to go through all the various museums. I think they're going to have a ball, but I wanted to let him know they were coming. I assume he knows they're coming, or he'll be apprised of it. A couple of LIFT-related items. I guess I'd like to I think the issue that was raised in unscheduled comments about the documents is I know we've had a lot of sort of just getting on the same wavelength, given that LIFT is a separate legal entity, and I know we did the IGA tonight in terms of teeing up who's got responsibility for what. Just would be a respectful request, knowing there's certainly been no ill intent, to whenever we have the opportunity to make publicly available documents easily available, it probably is a good idea to do that. And obviously, that's our modus operandi anyway, and I think it's just in response there too. However, there have been over the past several meetings, a number of citizens that have come down to provide some thoughts. And I know collectively, LIFT, council, and all the citizens involved our collective intent is to have a serious discussion about these issues and not accidentally create misperceptions or fear or discomfort among people who aren't as well versed in some of this stuff, but who may be involved at some level in terms of how things are being done. Couple of the comments tonight, in particular the comments concerning the dichotomy of the South Metro housing units between the HUD versus a finding of blight, HUD standards of quality versus a finding of blight. I'm going to suggest that I think, without having gone back and looked at the map specifically, that there probably very likely is an ability to have a blight finding related to some very specific parameters and also be completely acceptable as far as HUD is concerned. And therefore, it's not a situation where one absolutely precludes the other, as was sort of implied. And I think that's probably not as an accurate a representation as could be made. But just in a general sense, I'm going to read out a couple of things here just to make sure that they're on the record. And it'll take just a minute, but I'll try to be brief with it. As we've said repeatedly, that according to state statute and various court cases, urban renewal authorities are created to prevent and eliminate conditions of slum and blight. And as it so happens, very few, if any, urban renewal projects in Colorado actually have conditions that qualify as slum. While the conclusion of whether an area constitutes a legally blighted area is a determination for a municipal legislative body such as council, the conditions survey that gets prepared provides a detailed documentation of the physical, environmental, and social factors as they exist within the boundaries defined. Now, this is important. It's not legally necessary for every factor to be present in an area in order for it to be considered blighted. And in addition, a given factor need not be present on each and every parcel of a structure to be counted, but rather only needs to be present somewhere in the area as a whole. So, in other words, what that basically means is the presence of one or more well-maintained non-blighted buildings or parcels does not necessarily preclude a finding of blight for a larger area in which blighting factors are present. And so, for example, with a Bradley House or an Allison Court, there may be attributes in the area that would allow them to take advantage of an urban renewal activity in terms of the bonds to upgrade infrastructure paid by incremental tax increment financing related to incremental property taxes, if they're in the boundary as determined specifically by state statute. Now, some of the factors that could potentially come into play. So, for example, defective or inadequate street layout, and this includes things that involves vehicular access, internal circulation, or parking layout that may or may not be present in those facilities. The Allison Court structure in particular has sort of a funky parking lot, so that may be something in there that would allow it to, quote unquote, take advantage of a blighted condition to get funding to help correct certain situations. Faulty lot layout in relation to size, accessibility, or usefulness. Unsafe conditions could include poor lighting, uneven sidewalks, poor drainage, vandalism, or graffiti. Deterioration of site or improvements could include poorly maintained properties, trash, debris, weeds, or landscaping. So, long story short, without going through all 11 of these things, there are many attributes of an entire area which come into play here, and it's important to thoughtfully consider what's being accomplished by putting something in or outside of a quote-unquote urban renewal area. The other thing I'm going to say is that, again, the comment was earlier made as well that there was opposition to urban renewal because it equals condemnation or eminent domain. I've heard at least one LIFT board member, and again, this is sort of jumping the gun a bit by virtue of the fact that none of these plans or any of this has actually come to LIFT board for final approval or to council for approval. But at least one LIFT board member stated at the last meeting that he had no interest in urban renewal, and I've heard that comment from at least one member up here, and I would...
And urban renewal?
Eminent domain.
Okay.
I misspoke. Eminent domain. Thank
Okay.
you. Thanks for the clarification, or condemnation.
That's okay.
Yeah.
You weren't going to go far with that.
No,
Then
that's
you could probably get off the board, right?
my bad.
It's okay.
I've heard people, some of us up here say that. I'm going to say flat out that absent an extraordinary situation where a property owner would come in and say, I would prefer to have a property condemned by virtue of some potentially favorable tax consequences that could theoretically arise, I don't have any burning desire to do eminent domain anything. I do have an interest in seeing if we can get bonding in place with tax increment financing to help people improve infrastructure, facades, address some of the issues like lighting, street layout, deterioration if it exists, so forth and so on. But that's completely different than saying if we do an urban renewal plan, we're automatically going to start condemning broad swaths of the community, which I think is, again, it's taking the conversation down a path that's not really serious and creates a lot of fear and anxiety among people that haven't paid anywhere near as much attention to this as certain citizens as council and as the LIFT board is doing. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to chat more about this in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Cole.
Oh, so I've got about 4 things, short. But the issues Ms. Breezak raised really concern me in terms of accessibility to records and so forth. So to the extent the city staff can facilitate accessibility, particularly if we're having records here, I really appreciate that. I want to thank the city staff who helped with the Share the Trail event on Saturday. That was a really nice event, and the staff did a really great job. And lots of citizens, some of those folks biked from Thornton. I mean, they're just passing by, but that's a widely used trail, as everybody knows. Then any citizens who might still be watching, if you are not already planning a neighborhood block party for National Night Out, I hope you'll consider that. It's a wonderful event, and you can register your party on the city website. And then I have a request. As soon as council deals with the wayfinding, because I assume we're going to do something with wayfinding, and then we know what our sidewalks might look like, how much more or less they may have for people to have to negotiate around. I would like us to revisit the issue of displays on the sidewalks. So, but I want to see what the context is with the wayfinding. So.
That's it?
That's it. Thank you.
What do you mean by revisit?
Well, right now we've limited significantly the ability of people to display things on the sidewalk.
We've permitted what was previously prohibited.
I know, but what we've done is limit in what we're doing. I'm not saying we've limited more or whatever, but the rules that we've set up limit. And I would like us to have discussion revisiting that after we see what we're dealing with wayfinding. That's all I'm requesting.
I would say we're not necessarily hooked with wayfinding, but we had asked the city staff to work with the merchants over the summer to take a look at the impact and go through some discussion with that when we went through that ordinance.
And we have had no applications for that.
And so that gives us some information on an interim basis.
Well, there's sure a lot of buzz out there. So maybe we need to give people a chance, encourage them to speak publicly so we all know, we all are having the same information. So anyway, thank you.
I'd just add that if people applied for it, we would have some level of understanding of what those impacts are, but we have no applications have come in, so there's no analysis that can be done based upon the reality of how the ordinance is
am I
been used.
misremembering what I've read in the paper and heard otherwise, that a whole bunch of people came to apply for
Those were for structures in the rights of way, not for the ordinance that you're discussing.
No, I know, but it's in response to the ordinance that we had, as I understand it.
Two very different requests, because you still can't put merchandise in an area that, even if you have an enclosed structure.
I'll chat with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Beckman.
Just a comment about Monday's presentation by Mayor Hancock to Denver in his State of the City address. I had an opportunity to attend that on behalf of the city. And after he had thanked the members of his staff and talked about some of their accomplishments, he began to present his vision for Denver. And it's really important that we know the direction that Denver's going in. He was very upfront and talked about the regional nature of the successes. He talked about some of the agendas of CML and the Metro mayors and how Denver and the region is profiting from the successful accomplishment and overcoming of some of those challenges. And he also laid out some additional agendas that he thinks would be helpful, particularly ones that we were aware of that were CML objectives. So in sum total, I think it's important that maybe we take a look at that. Not that I would support, or any of us would support, every one of his visions or issues, but I think it's helpful for us to know that and not miss it. I did not see if it was in the newspaper in any detail, but it's once you get through his thanks and all the pomp and circumstance of that and just get to his points, I think it would be a very valuable thing for the members of the council and perhaps staff even to see, because it is a big regional issue. And I thought it was a very well-run event, so thank you.
Okay.
We'll get that out to you.
Thank you. And then this is our first meeting with comments since we kind of scratched them last week of thanks for the 4th of July and all of the fireworks and everything that went on. The live music that the city sponsored at Cornerstone was pretty interesting because it was a country music group, and I think it was their first time ever playing in conjunction with fireworks, and they managed to have a 4th of July miracle, is their word. Their music coincided exactly with the finale, so it was really pretty amazing on that front. For council, looking to schedule Tracy and or someone in addition to Tracy, Huggins, and so that would be coming forward. And then wanted to do a brief response to former Mayor Clark's comments about, not this evening, but the ones dealing with the outstanding bonds and debt that expired in 2008. Sometimes we wish for some things, and no matter how hard we might wish or hope that something will happen, it's not always there. And the documents do show that in 1999, the bonds were refinanced. It was recognized that there is a 25-year limit on an urban renewal project. Riverfront was started in 1983, therefore the bond expiration would be in 25 years, which would correspond with 2008. In 1999, also the debt associated with that was incurred by The Riverfront Authority, in conjunction with that, was also set to extinguish or expire in that 2008 schedule. So it's, as we've heard several times over, an urban renewal project has a 25-year limit. That's why it's important to make haste when you do decide upon some things, so that when that period's there, you have that maximum recovery period for whatever revenue might be associated with that. And I would just like to encourage folks to take the cognitive surplus that we have in thinking about things to possibly focus on what we do want to have happen going forward, our positive and optimistic city, and what we can be doing to bring those things to bear. So that would be something that I would encourage. Other than that, Council, we're adjourned.